My family and I live in Harleysville, Pennsylvania. I live there with my wife and our 2 kids who are teenagers. I serve as a pastor on a church in Harleysville. It's called LCBC Church, and I've been a pastor for about 25 years now in a couple of different churches. And I'm also a member of the Montgomery County Concert Band. I play in the tuba section there. I've done that for about the last 5 years. My relationship with Pepper started a couple of years ago because I started researching the history of the sousaphone, and that led me to Pepper and to you. And for the last 2 or 3 years now, I've had a chance to kind of hang around here quite a bit in the process of learning more about the sousaphone. Sousaphone is basically, it's the largest member of the tuba family, and it's the one that most people have seen before. If they've ever been to a high school football game or a college football game and they've seen the marching band, they see these great big brass or sometimes fiberglass horns, bass horns, and those are sousaphones. Although the original sousaphone had a bell that pointed straight up, as we'll see, rather than forward like they do today. And the other thing that a lot of people don't know about is that the original sousaphone had no intention of being used in a marching band or a marching setting at all. It was designed to be used in a concert setting with a concert band. And it got its name, as you might have guessed, from the great bandmaster John Philip Sousa, who was active in the latter part of the 19th century and early part of the 20th century. And he had sent the idea or pitched the idea for this new horn to a manufacturer, J.W. Pepper, who was based in Philadelphia at that time. And Pepper, after crafting the horn or making the horn, decided to honor Sousa by calling it a sousaphone. There had been some controversy about who actually built the first sousaphone, but I have been able to pretty much clear that up without any shadow of a doubt lingering that J.W. Pepper did in fact build the first one. But the other thing that surprised me in my research that I wasn't expecting to come across was that first sousaphone, even though it was the very first one, I don't think was ever played in the Sousa band or perhaps played in any band. And shortly after it was built, it seems to have just disappeared. For years, all the way up until today, people have believed, because the claim has been out there for decades, that Kahn built the first sousaphone. But we didn't have any hard evidence for the idea that Pepper had built it. Until in my research, there was a guy named Don Johnson who lives in Kentucky, who's a great collector of Pepper instruments and music, and he found the notice of a letter that was from October of 1895, so 2 or 3 years before Kahn built his sousaphone, where it talks about there's this new instrument that Pepper had built that has become all the rage in St. Louis, which is where the Sousa band was playing at the time. But the horn wasn't there, apparently. It was the photos of this brand new horn that were in the front windows of a famous music store there, and people were walking by that going, wow, this new instrument called the sousaphone. And then there was a mention a year later in 1896 in one of Pepper's journals, the Musical Times and Band Journal, where it lists Herman Conrad as the sousaphone player in Sousa's band. And so obviously the sousaphone existed, again, 2 or 3 years before Kahn's did. When I started doing research on the sousaphone, I began posting some of what I had been finding on a discussion website for tuba and euphonium players, and in the process was encouraged to publish my findings. And so I contacted the folks at the ITEA Journal, and they were delighted to be able to feature an article about the early history of the sousaphone. So the last 6 months or 7 months or so, I really began to dig in to kind of close all the gaps that I could in what I had learned, and created an article that will be coming out in May in their journal that lays out, once again, the early history of the sousaphone. So the specific horn, the prototype that Pepper came up with, probably used an existing body, and that body is what wraps around like sousaphones do today. It rests on the left shoulder, and then just recrafted a bell, a much, much larger bell than a tuba has, but similar kind of bell, just with it pointing straight up. And then the particular features of this horn that are the most notable are the engravings that are on the front of the bell. Since this was the very first sousaphone, Pepper made sure that there was some historic engravings made on it. And if you look at it from top to bottom, you will see, first of all, this really cool engraving of John Philip Sousa himself, wearing the uniform from the 1894 band of his, which also helped us to kind of hone in on the date that it was built. And then below that, there is this ribbon that kind of is in 2 pieces that has the word Sousa and then phone. And so that is probably where our first official use of the word sousaphone is found, is right there on the bell. Below that are a bunch of kind of flowers and clusters of grapes, and even I think like a funky goat head or sheep head or something. And in the middle there's some text where it basically says, J.W. Pepper is the maker. It's listed as premier or own make, meaning this is the line that Pepper actually built. Pepper did a lot of importing of instruments, but this represents one that was manufactured right there in Philadelphia on 8th and Locust Street. It gives the serial number, but then it also mentions something that kind of throws people off on the date. It says something to the effect of World's Fair or World's Columbian Exposition 1893. So when people see that date on it, they go, oh, well, this was built in 1893, but actually that's not true. 1893 is when Pepper had won an award at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, as did Kahn, by the way. They had their two little booths kind of set up right next to each other, and there were judges that would give awards to those booths, and both Kahn and Pepper won awards for their band instruments. Well, Pepper was thrilled at having won that award, and so he put on the bell of not just that sousaphone, but a lot of his instruments, even instruments made much later than the sousaphone, just to kind of boast about recent accolades of, look, we won this great award. So that's probably the most interesting part of the horn, is just looking at those engravings. The valve cluster itself is a little bit unusual, not at all like what you see in a sousaphone today. It has 3 valves, but then some of the tubing just kind of bends around in some unusual ways. And by the way, the other thing that I had discovered in the course of my research is that it was never finished. It was never given a polished lacquered brass look or a silver plated finish. It was raw brass, which is among the reasons why I'm pretty convinced that it was never used in public. It was kind of like it never had its clothes put on. The original sousaphone weighs about 25 pounds. The one that the first sousaphone player ended up playing regularly in the Sousa band weighed 33 pounds. And that's a long time to have something sitting on your shoulder that weighs that much. Well, his name was Hermann Conrad. He was a German immigrant who apparently had been in the army. There is one photograph of Conrad holding the horn and looking like he's playing, and it even says that the horn was being used daily in Sousa's Peerless Concert Band, is what the quote says. I have found absolutely zero evidence of that horn being used publicly. And what we do find is by the time we get to 1898, we find this sousaphone being presented to the world that was built by C.G. Kahn, and it's claimed, or at least everyone assumes it's the very first one that anyone's ever seen. Of course, it's not. We know now that Pepper horn was first. But that's the first time we see a sousaphone being used, and played by Conrad, by the way, in the Sousa band, and that's in 1898. And from that point on, Kahn sousaphones are the only ones you see in photographs of the Sousa band. So what happened to that horn? Why wasn't it used in the band, or at least it doesn't show up in any photos or in any news clippings? As far as I can tell, and we can only speculate about this, but there's probably a couple of reasons why it was never used. When Sousa came up with the idea for this horn, he wasn't just looking for a spectacle, some big giant monster that people would go, wow, what is that? He was actually trying to create a sound that he envisioned being included in his band, a bass sound that would, his quote is something like that, it would diffuse over the band like frosting on a cake. He wanted that kind of sound, which is why he created this big bell where the bass sound would then just envelop the whole band. I'm just guessing, and again, just speculation, that perhaps once the prototype was made and before it was finished, they tried it out and Sousa was like, that's not the sound I'm looking for. Maybe Hermann Conrad also tried it, and maybe it was the same thing. It didn't quite meet the standards that they were hoping for, and so it needed to go back to the factory, back to the drawing board, so to speak, and yet apparently Pepper never worked on it further. We do have some evidence, courtesy of Paul Byerly, who is one of the great Sousa scholars in the world today, but he has found evidence that there were some financial struggles in the Pepper Company at that time, and so it might be as simple as the fact that it didn't quite meet Sousa standards, and Pepper just didn't have the funds or the time to be able to work on it to get it up to Sousa standards. And so Sousa perhaps then said, all right, I'm going to go to Kahn and have him build one of these, which 2 years later, that's exactly what we find. As far as we can tell, this sousaphone, the prototype that was built in 1895, is the only sousaphone that Pepper actually ever built in his factory. Pepper's sousaphone disappears shortly after it was built, and I have not been able to come across any record of it showing up anywhere until 1973. So a long time after its disappearance. And the story behind that is actually my favorite part of the research that I've done. I was able to track down a guy named John Bailey, who lives in the Reading area of Pennsylvania. He was the one that found it, and the story goes like this. He had just graduated. He was in his early 20s, I think 24. He had graduated from Westchester State College, as it was called in the 70s, here in Pennsylvania. He was a tuba major, a music major. He returned home to the Reading area, Wernersville, I think it is. One Sunday afternoon in the spring of 1973, the family decided to go to Renninger's Flea Market in Adamstown, just sort of like an antique store, apparently. But as he's looking around the shop, he sees up on the ceiling, hanging from the rafters, this old Raincatcher sousaphone, tarnished and dusty as all get out, hanging with just a single loop of binder twine from the rafters. And so he asked the people at Renninger, saying, how much for that old horn? And they said $50. So he was like, that's totally worth it. He runs home, comes back and buys the thing. As he's polishing it up and trying to get all the dust and tarnish off, he finds the engravings on the bell, which tips him off to this is maybe something more significant than just an old piece of junk. Trouble is, he's young, he doesn't have a lot of money, so he basically stored the horn, and for 20 years, even though he knew he had something of historical significance, he saw the words J.W. Pepper on it, so he knew that it had been made by the Pepper Company, which was, not too far away from where he lived. But it's not until 1991, August 1991, that he contacted you guys and finally decided to sell it to you, knowing that this was a piece of history and that it would be great to be back in your hands again. So I just think it's cool that, just on a random visit to a random antique store, this guy finds the very first sousaphone, and it finds its way back to its maker, J.W. Pepper. In the course of my research, I spent a lot of time with you, George, and with the folks here at Pepper to go through your archives and find out more about the history of this wonderful, one-of-a-kind treasure of an instrument. And in the process, somewhere along the line, we were talking, and you graciously offered to allow me to play this horn publicly. So to get this instrument ready for its perhaps first public appearance in a band, I am going to be taking it to Dylan Music in New Jersey, since it is the most local to us of a place that I trust. It has a world-class tuba tech there named Matt Walters, and I'm going to be driving it out to them so they can examine it, and in return they're going to be looking at the horn and seeing what we can do to get it to sound and look as good as it possibly can without altering any of the historical look or layout of the horn. So we don't know. The bottom line is we don't know if it's going to sound great or not. I have played it here at Pepper and it sounds good by itself, but how it will sound with a band is what we're going to work on out at Dylan Music.
Hi, I'm Steve Dillon of Dylan Music in Woodbridge, New Jersey here. Dylan Music has been here since 1992. We cater to the high-end brass and woodwind players the world over. We also deal in antique and historic musical instruments. Matt Walters, who is one of my technicians here, who will be working on the sousaphone, has been with me over 20 years now. Matt came to me, he was working in West Virginia. He worked on airplanes for Federal Express, and he started with me, like I said, about 20 years ago. He deals just in the big horns and repairs just the big instruments, the big tubas and sousaphones. That's his passion, and we like to call him the tuba whisperer because he can take a tuba that is virtually unplayable and a lot of times get it up to speed and get it to play. Now today we're going to be looking at the sousaphone. We're going to disassemble it. We're going to look at the different parts. We're going to see basically try to unravel a little bit of its history just by looking at the instrument and what has been done to it over the last 100 and some odd years, and repairs, and how wear patterns and whatnot have occurred on the instrument. That'll tell us a lot of its history. No, because look, there's no thumb ring, so you see the wear. Give me that magnifying glass. You see the wear on that.
On that band there.
You don't have the typical, yes.
Yeah, so that's where your finger is going. It's interesting that they make it a 4-valve because Conrad.
Right, and that might also have been a knock against it as well.
That's interesting. Matt, come here. Look at these bottom valve caps.
I know, I saw those first thing when you flipped it over.
Look at
the
that.
air vents.
The air vents, yeah.
I would like, well, I can't wait till I have my chance to get this apart.
Now this configuration did show up, not exactly, but very close in some of the Helicons from that time period. So they seem to have patterned the way everything is wound around.
Well, this is probably the valve section they would have taken off a Helicon.
I haven't found this exactly out, but I've seen it pretty close.
I did this neck for you based
on his picture.
Right.
The fact that I saw that it had a locking joint for the bit. And so what somebody had done before was used a Conn neck and bit set, which Conn, hold on a second, let's find you the other set of bits. This is a vintage bit from Conn, and this has the Morse taper, and they're interchangeable to take mouthpieces, so one's interchangeable from the other. but they're not set up to have a lock, so they just rely on friction fit. And I did notice in the original picture that there was a locking joint for the bit.
Right there.
Sure enough.
So, and the neck was a short 90 degree, so I copied that. And this is what I came up with
See,
without
he's-
having the
he's
horn in my
cocked with
possession
that.
based upon the pictures.
Yeah, awesome job.
And now you can lock that in so you won't be wiggling around on
Yeah.
you at the concert. All right, so going backwards, now I got a neck and bits. First valve, I would love to see this. So it's an older valve, tons of pitting. But now this is something very interesting. A lot of manufacturers will have valves with blisters. When you have a tight area, you'll have a bump inside here. What's amazing looking at this JW Pepper valve is there's very little blister. So the bore size of the valve is quite accurate, okay? So there's a little bit of dirt. There's just not a lot of gunk, and that's fine. It's obviously been cleaned before and not played a lot, but there's still that. It can gum up your valves a little bit for you. So, yeah, well, I'm just, let me get a little more pressure here, sorry. Well, you're just washing out a horn, right? But you can do some preemptive sleuthing here, looking around for dust down in this area here. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a sponge and reach down in and just clean out what I can. Hope there's no dead mice in there or anything. Yeah, you're surprised what you find down inside. I can only imagine.
There's a patch on here, Dave.
What'd you find?
Right on the neck piece. See? Patch.
Yeah, I can see that.
Sometime during its life, what happened was,
Oh, I see, yeah.
screw this right here, this started to crack. Someone, instead of unsoldering
So
this,
they
they
just
just
wrapped it.
wrapped a patch on it. Let's start here. See how,
And it's starting to get fuzzier and fuzzier as you go up.
now as we get up here, if you, especially if you look at the top, boom.
And that second line disappears as well.
This has been used. The horn has been used
Yeah.
a lot. To do that, you have to
okay?
Put in a lot of time.
a lot of time, and there's a lot of hand rubbing.
Round one was a little, so something's a little bit out of round. The valve doesn't want to work that way, but when it's lined up in the direct location, it works just fine.
Yeah.
Did you see any little scratch marks? A lot of guys.
Yeah. Give me the. Where's the?
Yes, I see it.
Let me see.
There and there. Hey guys, come here and take a look at this. You might find this interesting. Yeah, see the engraving mark? So that it helps the player put the bell in the right spot. Quite often there was a little engraving mark or a scratch or something, and you'd match the female end and the male end on the bell so that you could line the two up.
And here's the other, here's the one on the belt.
Fantastic.
Now let's see if it does the one thing I always say with a sousaphone. No, not that. If it stands on its bell, with the bell on.
Stands up. Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking.
Well, yeah. You.
Yeah, on the bell. You mean it would hold itself up that way?
It's balanced right.
Huh. Huh.
Because
Hey,
what would the
wait a
player
second, wait a second. All right.
what would
Gotta
the
get a
player
picture
do
of
after, when he's not playing it?
Set it upside down, just like that.
And then the band could also do like baseballs thrown through it. It's a game. Yeah.
I am so grateful that Dave has taken on to do this because, you know, it's not the academics that bring us the history. It's the armchair historians who dig through the things, who want, you know, you go to music schools across the country, they're not going to dig into this. They don't care. It's the armchair historians that we're bringing it forth to the next generation. So the next generation then knows, hey, this is how it was made. This is what happened. So I'm very thankful to Dave for doing this.
And since I am a member of the Montgomery County Concert Band, locally here, we have our 20th anniversary concert coming up in May next month. And I'm going to be playing that in the concert. And because of that, we've scheduled an inordinately large number of Sousa marches in our program. Since this is the original sousaphone, we thought that would be perfect. So I'm going to be playing that horn on 4 of the Sousa marches, as well as having it featured a little bit in a special Dixieland piece that we're going to be doing. And I'm very excited about that. It may be that this is the first time in, I don't know, 100 and something years that this horn has been played in the context of a band. Maybe the first time ever, I don't know. So that excites me as well. The way we've set it up at the concert is after the concert, and of course we've put a piece in the program that explains a little bit of the history of the horn, and then we invite people afterward that if they want to see this piece of history up close and personal, I'll be with the horn out in the atrium after the concert, and people can take pictures of it and look at it and check out the engravings. And yeah, we just want people to see this important part of musical history in our country. I am thrilled to have kind of stumbled into this whole area of research in the early history of the sousaphone. I'm not a music scholar. This is not my field. I'm a pastor, but this is something, I have a history playing the sousaphone, and of course I'm an active tuba player, so I just kind of stumbled into this thing and I'm having a blast with it. So I've just been glad to be able to bring some clarity to the history of this important member of the tuba family. It's certainly important to clarify that Pepper is in fact the maker of the very first sousaphone, because again, there's been controversy about that for decades, and we can pretty much just settle that now. There's really no question that Pepper built the very first sousaphone. But what I want people to remember about the sousaphone is that, and I mentioned this earlier, is that it was created because of a certain sound that Sousa envisioned being a part of his band. And of course, his band ended up becoming the top band in the world, probably for quite a number of years, designed by John Philip Sousa himself. There isn't any other instrument that can claim that. You know, the greatest, perhaps, musician that America has ever produced. This is his baby, this is his instrument. And so I just want people to remember that this is not a marching instrument, because today that's all we know it as. There are a few exceptions, but really it only shows up now, modern day sousaphones, in marching bands in high school and college, that sort of a thing. But it's not a marching instrument, it's a concert instrument. It was designed to be what Sousa felt an instrument that produced the very, very best sound, to make the very, very best concert band sound as good as it could possibly sound.